Good evening. So I'm Thomas Trehus. We are related, I'll get to that later, but I'm here to introduce Rick Trehus, or Eric Trehus, Dr. Trehus. And first I want to thank our sponsors for tonight, of which I'm a part of. So I have the pleasure of introducing Rick. Sons of Norway, here at Valheim Lodge, is a sponsor. Wilmington Church, Welcome, and Wilmington Church in Wilmington Township is a sponsor, as well as the Spring Grove Community Education, Spring Grove Public Schools. So very happy that they're able to sponsor this program tonight. Eric Trehus, medical doctor, is a 1973 graduate of Spring Grove Public High School. He went on to, all right, 73 graduates, anybody? All right, 73, good year. Rick went on to Augsburg College in Minneapolis, followed by the University of Minnesota for medical school. He then went on to family practice residency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was a family physician at Health Partners in Minneapolis from 1984 until 2015. While there, Rick was the chief medical officer at Brooklyn Center Clinic for 12 years, chairperson of Preventative Health Services, and professor of family medicine through University of Minnesota for 17 years, member of AMA, American Academy of Family Physicians, Minnesota Medical Association, and since retirement has given talks in Florida, Chicago, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Rick is married and has 2 adult children, currently resides in Maiden Rock, Wisconsin. So please give it up for Eric Trehus.
Thanks, and I really do appreciate you coming here. And as I look at this theater, I'm thinking, what a beautiful place this is, and what a commitment to Spring Grove that a place like this exists. I've been back many times to see friends like Mike Moan and see Thomas and David, and every time I come back, I'm just really happy and impressed with what Spring Grove is. The town itself obviously has a great deal of pride. Driving through the streets, the lawns are manicured, the houses are painted, and you just don't see that in a lot of other little towns. And I'm just so proud, and it's really to you, hands up to you to do all of those measures, as well as your decisions that are made by your council and whatnot to keep Spring Grove growing. It's really a pleasure to come back to this town, and I really do love it. So you're probably wondering what's Ricky Trehus doing here tonight. I retired 3 years ago, and I did not think I would be public speaking at that time. I thought I would be doing things for me, and I have done this, backpacking and going to the Bond Waters and doing all sorts of trips and whatnot, and having a very wonderful time. Started a little woodworking business myself, and all that is great, and that's what I thought I'd be doing. But something happened to me when I retired, and that is I had time. I never had time. Growing up in Spring Grove, and I had to make money. I didn't know it then, but we really didn't have much money. And so baling hay and delivering newspapers and mowing lawns and all the such, and continuing that on to taking whatever job I could just to make some money to make it through. And then of course you go to college, and I knew nobody. Nobody was going to make me a medical student just by name. So I had to study, I had to do things, and many people have to work hard. I'm not singling myself out, but I never had time. And then you get into medical practice, and I leave before 7, I get home after 7, try to have a decent meal with my family, try to relate a little bit, and then read a little bit, and then go to bed and do it again. So 60, 80-hour weeks were pretty much the standard. And many people do that, and I applaud them to get through and raise good families that way. But I never had time. When I retired, I had some time. So I started reading. And I didn't have to read things I normally read. I would read about, a challenging patient or something that was new and vogue in the medical field. That's all I had time to do. But now I have time. I can sit back and I can read about the things that were kind of interesting. And my natural inclination is to read about science and about health. And as you get on the internet, you kind of go from one subject to another subject. And here you're down this line, and you don't even know how you got there, but you're reading this interesting article. And I started reading about some things that I never would have experienced while being a physician, because they weren't the standard things you learn about. The things that are popular, things that are a bit more off-center don't get put in the journals that I'm supposed to read to keep up to date. But I didn't have to answer to anybody now, so I read them. And they were very interesting to me and very different. And I kept reading. And after about 6 months, I started believing what they had to say, because I would read some books and then more books and read more articles and more blogs. And after about 6 months, it dawned on me that this stuff that I was reading was actually true, and very, very well done studies that were proving these things. And you're going to be just about as amazed, I think, as I was when I started reading these things as I go forward. And as I read them, it really completed a picture to me, because when I was in practice and the patient would come to me and you name the disease, people would say, well, why did I get this? You know, why should I have it? And I would tell them the rote answers that I learned from my mentors or from the specialists, and that was, well, maybe it's genetic, or it could be something you got into. I don't know, it's hard to track that down. Or the worst one was, I don't know, just bad luck. Well, that gives you a lot of power, doesn't it? A lot of things you can do with that. Yeah, I can change my family history? Yeah, I don't think so. And so it was very frustrating for me to see these diseases, and some people would have multiple different diseases, seemingly unrelated, and I said, well, why does this unfortunate person have so many things going on with them? And there was no unifying concept that could describe why this person had so many things wrong. Until I started reading after the fact, after I retired, this unifying concept that I'm going to tell you about tonight. I used to give this talk with many different slides and kind of blast people with data and information, and by the end I was bored with myself. And so I decided I'm going to throw that away. I'm just going to tell the story. And the story it's not that long. It's very interesting to me, and I think you'll find it at least intriguing. And it answers a lot of questions for me. So I'm going to tell that story, and at the end, I'm going to ask for some questions from you. And I really do want you to ask questions, because that's the part I enjoy. And that's what gives each audience a new flavor for me. So please, if you've got a question, remember it and ask it when it's time to ask some questions. So, how's that for a short intro, huh? The disease and health are part of the same coin. Heads is not tails, and tails is not heads. They are not the same thing, but they are part of the same process. And if you make the right choices and you do the things that I've come to learn as truth, you have a much better chance of getting through this life without illness than if you didn't make these correct choices. People live past 100 years old. And I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about 34 times the rate that people live a healthy, productive life past the age of 100. And one of the key elements that every one of those societies, not related genetically, not related by location, even by diet sometimes, one of the key elements was relationships. It's important to have good relationships. And the really cool thing about a town like this is that you have that ability. It's small enough. You have the coincidence of running into people on the street. That isn't necessarily the case in larger towns. So relationships is what I also talk about in those other towns. So, nutrition-ish is what I want to talk about. But I want to talk about 5 things that I want you to know. And at least if you don't know them, please ask questions about them, because it's really important that you know the first one to understand the second, third, fourth, and fifth. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the microbiome. Second one is intestinal permeability, or what's referred to as the leaky gut. Third one is what happens when you have foreign invasion into the next layers of your gut and induce immune response. Fourth thing is the immune response causing inflammation, and the fifth thing is what inflammation does to the end organ or to, let's say, your heart arteries or your thyroid or different structures, and why that transcends into disease. Sounds like a lot. It's not going to be that technical. I want you to know this, and I want to speak in your terms. If I don't, please call me on it. So the first thing is the microbiome. How many have heard of the microbiome? Raise your hand. A few people. Okay, good. The microbiome. This one took me a while to really embrace. It was, I had to keep reading and read the authors and read the books and whatnot, because this one, it took a long time for me to really grasp and say, wow, I guess this really is something. And when I describe it to you, I think you're going to probably shake your head a little bit, as I did. The microbiome is the bacteria, the viruses, the bacteriophages, that reside in your intestines. So we're going to talk about your intestines, folks. Not personally, you don't have to feel embarrassed about this personally, but it is what is inside. It's from your stomach till it comes out the other end. I know, it's pretty interesting, to say the least. And it's about what happens in that area when you put things into it, such as food, such as drink. And up until just about 20 years ago, it was felt to be just this innocuous thing that didn't have anything to do with us, really. It was just there. In fact, they knew about it 300 years ago when Leeuwenhoek started looking at these bacteria and noticed bacteria in our colon, but no big deal until about 20 years ago, until it started to be studied. And what they studied was, well, why are these bacteria there? What are they doing? There's 10,000 different types of bacteria in our intestines. There's got to be a reason why they're there. And they started looking at each one of these 10,000 types. What do they do? Well, bacteria are very, very interesting structures. They emit chemicals. A great example is food poisoning. Anybody here have food poisoning? You don't want to admit it? I know you have. I had it, and I had it when my wife was 8.5 months pregnant, and all of about 112 pounds, and I passed out, hit my head on the toilet, and was sprawled out in the bathroom, and she had to yank me and get me into bed, and there I was for 2 days, and I never want to have it again. This is a process where these bacteria that we ingest, or at least we ingest the toxins that were made by these bacteria that get into our colon, and they have a direct irritation to our intestinal linings. And they really raise havoc. If you've ever had this, you know what I'm talking about. You have no choice. It's got you. So these bacteria have a message that they're sending to your colon, to your intestines. There's not only bad bacteria, there's good bacteria. There's good bacteria that we absolutely need in our gut, but we don't have a lot of times because we have what's called the standard American diet, or the SAD diet. This is creating illness, and every one of you has some version of what I'm going to talk about, unless you've gone to a very high fat, good fat, low carbohydrate diet and eliminate a lot of these other things I'm going to say in a few minutes here. So, as an example of a good bacteria. Good bacteria will help take in amino acids, which are essential for our protein structures and building of cells and hormones and different structures about our body. And we need these amino acids. If we don't have that bacteria, we don't get it, and we have a problem. One of those problems is called depression. Serotonin. You've heard of Prozac, right? Prozac is a very good medication, came out 30 years ago or so, and really revolutionized the treatment of depression. 1 out of 4 adults will be diagnosed with depression at some point in their lifetime. It's not a good thing, and it's life-ending in some cases. Well, the serotonin chemical is important in that. That's what Prozac does. It works on the serotonin. Serotonin is not much in your brain. 80% of all serotonin-producing cells is in the gut. It's within this far of what we eat. And if you don't have the right bacteria to transmit the building blocks of serotonin, you don't get serotonin. And you have depression. And so all the stuff in the past about guilting you, why are you affected? Why are you, when you get depression, you don't want to admit it. You don't even want to go to the doctor, particularly males. Wives would have to bring them in kicking and screaming. They get on medication, and by God, they get better, and then they thank me. But it is physical. It isn't something, you may have had bad things, and you lower your resistance to certain things, and you have a reaction to it, and then can develop depression. But it's also what you don't have in your colon that you should have in your intestines to absorb the right things to make serotonin so you don't get colon depression. And so you then can withstand those pressures that would then lead you to depression if you didn't have the right chemicals. So there's an example of good and bad bacteria. And so they looked at these bacteria and they were able to see a pattern in this. And they called it a ratio between good and bad bacteria. And then they started looking at different cultures around the world. And it became very, very apparent that Americans and first world countries, such as Europe and parts of Asia, what we call sophisticated societies, had kind of a similar pattern of what their ratio was. And they had somewhat similar disease patterns. So there was kind of a correlation there. Well, then they started looking at Aboriginal societies, living in the deepest parts of Amazon or Africa or the Aborigines of Australia. And they had a very different pattern of good and bad bacteria. And when you started comparing the diseases, it was a very close correlation with the worse your microbiome or your bad bacteria was, the more disease you had. It's a linear relationship, and we can map this out with certain tagged chemicals and find this out. And when they found, I don't know if you remember the caveman, 5,000 years ago, he was stuck in a snowdrift and somebody found him in the Italian Alps. Turns out he was murdered. I think they're still looking for the guy. But they analyzed his microbiome. They were able to look at his intestine and see what was in there. And lo and behold, his microbiome matched the Aboriginal societies. In the Aboriginal societies, they don't really have cancer. They don't have heart disease. They don't have autoimmune disease. They rarely have diabetes. They have injuries and parasites and different things like that. But it's a whole, if someone came from another world, they'd be like a different species. They just don't have the same problems going. So they started trying to make this correlation. Then they went further, and this one really is quite amazing to me. They looked at autism. Okay, a horrible situation. Child was born, has no interaction, severe forms, have no interaction with the world around them. They don't talk, they don't interact with their parents. What a horrible nightmare for a parent to have to deal with autism. Well, they don't do this in America because insurance won't cover it, but they did it in England. They flushed this, I don't know how many, I think it was 12 people in the study, and then they had 12 controls of autism. And they flushed the colons out like you would for a colonoscopy. Anybody here ever had a colonoscopy? Anybody remember that prep? Yeah, I'm gonna forget it twice. And then they did what's called a fecal transplant. Yeah, that's what it is. They take that same colonoscopy instrument and infuse, give a syringe full of what would be considered a good microbiome, good bacteria. They put that in the colon of this autistic child. And within 3 of those 12 children, within a week, were starting to talk and interact. And within a month, all of them showed obvious changes, improvement changes. However, when those children were exposed to their standard diet, they reverted back into the autism ways. But if they were doing the things that I'm going to be talking about to you in just a little bit, they actually retained some of those good things and still kept interacting with their families. And I think that is just a dramatic thing that that unless unless you embrace that as being a real entity, you're losing out on something that could do some very good things for people.